大課長からは。
これは星物ですね。
This is a fake. The words cut through the air like broken glass. And she didn't whisper them. She said it loud enough for every man in the room to hear. In perfect Japanese. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. A black waitress, no older than 25, standing with perfect posture at the edge of a billion-dollar boardroom, just told the wealthiest people in the room that everything they believed, everything they were about to sign, was a lie. Her name? Raven Walker. She wasn't part of the deal. She wasn't in the meeting. She was just there to serve drinks, stay quiet, and not exist. At least, that's what they thought. Until she spoke. Until a black woman in a neatly pressed uniform, with perfect skin, magnetic eyes, and a presence that refused to be ignored, shattered the illusion. The contract in front of Naomi Takahashi, Japan's most powerful tech CEO, was worth $250 million. It was the centerpiece of the merger. A relic, supposedly centuries old, passed down through generations. Signed. Sealed. Sacred. But Raven saw something. She didn't touch the document. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just told the truth. And the room? It broke. Men in tailored suits stood frozen. Naomi's hand, inches above the signature line, began to tremble. No one moved. No one blinked. Because something had shifted. The power in the room wasn't sitting at the table anymore. It was standing beside it. This is not just a corporate thriller. This is a black story. A story about seeing through the performance, about holding your truth even when you're told you're just the help. About how history and futures can be rewritten by someone no one saw coming. You ever been underestimated? Then don't go anywhere. Because what Raven did next didn't just stop a scam. It exposed something much bigger. And if you're still with me now, hit like. Stick around. Because we're only at the beginning. Raven Walker didn't grow up wanting to serve anyone. She wanted to explore. She wanted to translate ancient texts, decode forgotten empires, and walk the quiet halls of museums after hours. She wanted the world to know her name, not because she demanded attention, but because she earned it. She had been that kid. The one who read Japanese history textbooks for fun. Who could write essays in kanji before she had a driver's license. The one who stayed up late watching documentaries, not dance trends. She earned a full ride to college. Majored in East Asian languages and civilizations. Graduated top of her class. Then life showed up. Her father, a retired construction worker with tired knees and the softest heart, was diagnosed with a rare condition. Medical bills piled up. Financial aid didn't stretch far enough. And scholarships don't mean much when the lights are off and the fridge is empty. So Raven put the dream on hold. She left behind the academic conferences and the grad school offers. And she picked up a tray. At first, she hated it. The long hours. The aching feet. The fake smiles. But what hurt most wasn't the work, it was the way people saw her. Or didn't. To them, she was just the help. Another black girl in uniform. Another pair of hands, silent and compliant. They didn't see the discipline in her posture. Or the brilliance behind her quiet eyes. They didn't know she could read the contract they were about to sign, in its original Japanese, better than they could. And Raven never corrected them. Because she had learned something in those rooms. Something powerful. The less they saw her, the more she saw everything. Who spoke with authority. Who cracked under pressure. Who flinched at numbers. Who smiled too wide. Who lied with ease. She read rooms the way most people read headlines. That's why she noticed it, the document. The paper was too clean. The ink too modern. The seal slightly wrong, off by centuries if you knew what to look for. And she did. She knew history. She knew forgery. And most of all, she knew the cost of silence. So when she spoke, in flawless Japanese, and said, "This is a fake," she wasn't making a scene. She was telling the truth. And the truth, that day, wore a black uniform with perfect stitching, and a voice nobody could ignore. The room was designed to impress and intimidate. Towering floor-to-ceiling windows framed the New York skyline like a painting. You could see Central Park in the distance, dotted with tiny green patches, and the Hudson River stretched out like liquid glass. It was the kind of view that only came with power. Real power. The kind that didn't blink at a $250 million deal. Inside, the lighting was soft and golden, the kind you see in luxury magazines, designed to flatter skin, not expose truth. Every chair was leather, every table custom-made. The air smelled like citrus oil and polished wood. Music? None. Silence was the soundtrack of power. This wasn't just any conference. It was the East Coast Innovation Roundtable, a semi-annual, invitation-only summit where the wealthiest minds in tech, finance, and energy came to flex, negotiate, and close. There were no press, no recordings, no assistants allowed past the second security checkpoint. Just deals, secrets, and signatures. Raven had worked this event twice before. Both times, she kept her head down and her steps light. She wasn't supposed to be seen, not really. That was the rule. You could be in the room, but never of the room. The guests, however, were another story. There was Richard Van Doren, founder of a logistics empire, known more for his scandals than his supply chain. He talked too loud and tipped too little. Celeste Hartman, an AI mogul from Seattle, sat near the window, her phone always in hand, her eyes rarely making contact with anyone in uniform. And then, there was Naomi Takahashi. The only woman on the main panel. The only Asian. The only one not born in America. She wore a minimalist black suit, tailored so precisely it looked sculpted. Her dark hair was pulled into a low chignon, her makeup understated but flawless. Her presence was quiet, but sharp. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She was the founder and CEO of Kyuzen Robotics, one of the fastest-growing tech firms in Japan. But in that room, she was treated like a footnote. The men talked over her. One executive even addressed her translator instead of speaking to her directly, as if she wasn't fluent in 3 languages and didn't hold 3 patents. Raven watched all of it. From the corner. With sharp eyes. Because in that room full of people who thought they ran the world, only 2 women knew what was really going on. Naomi Takahashi knew how to command a room. She just wasn't always given the room to command. At 42, Naomi had built an empire from scratch. Born in Osaka to a family of educators, she had grown up between bookshelves and train stations. She was always the quiet one, the girl who sat in the back of the classroom, listening more than speaking, calculating more than reacting. By the time she turned 28, she had already patented her first robotic microjoint. By 35, she'd founded Kyuzen Robotics, and within 5 years, it became the fastest-growing tech company in East Asia. She had spoken at the World Economic Forum, shaken hands with presidents, sat across tables from kings. But none of that mattered in that Manhattan boardroom. Here, they didn't see her brilliance. They saw her gender, her accent, her stillness. They took her silence as submission, her diplomacy as weakness. Naomi noticed the shift the moment she walked in. Men greeted each other with firm handshakes and back pats. When they turned to her, their eyes scanned past her shoulders, looking for someone else. An assistant, maybe. A man. Richard Van Doren didn't even stand up when she joined the table. He simply glanced up and muttered. Didn't expect the head of Kyuzen to be so petite. Celeste Hartman gave a tight smile, but said nothing. During the opening remarks, Naomi presented her company's strategic partnership plans. Her voice was steady, her facts airtight. But the men didn't respond with questions. They responded with corrections. Actually, in our market analysis. With all due respect, Miss Takahashi. As if she hadn't lived the data. As if she hadn't spent years in the field, in labs, in manufacturing plants across 3 continents. But Naomi was no stranger to being underestimated. Japan's tech world had tried the same thing. So had investors in London, Berlin, and Hong Kong. She had learned to let them speak. Let them dismiss her. Because eventually, they always made one mistake. They showed her exactly where the power was, and where the weakness lived. And today, she would watch them do it again. But this time, they wouldn't just underestimate her. They would overlook the woman standing beside the table, holding a tray, with a sharper eye than all of them combined. By 3:14 p.m., everything was in place. The decanter of scotch had been polished. The custom brass pens were laid out like weapons. Every executive had their seat. The room smelled of confidence, the manufactured kind, and Raven could almost taste the tension in the air. This was it. The final signing of a $250 million deal that had been in motion for almost 18 months. 2 continents. 4 legal teams. Dozens of meetings. And now, it came down to one document. A land deed. Not just any deed. This one was presented as a historical treasure. Supposedly signed in 1772 by a regional warlord in Okinawa, it transferred exclusive mining rights for an area rich in rare earth metals. The kind used in advanced robotics, lithium batteries, and quantum processors. The kind that could make or break entire industries. Brightstone Holdings, a U.S. tech and logistics giant, had positioned itself to acquire those rights by merging with Naomi Takahashi's company, Kyuzen Robotics. On paper, the deal made sense. Strategic synergy. Expanded global reach. Market domination. But underneath, something was off. Raven couldn't stop staring at the document. She was only supposed to be serving espresso, keeping quiet, blending into the background like polished woodwork. But her instincts were screaming. The paper was too flat, too clean, no natural curling. And the ink, it sat too neatly on the surface, too dark, like it had never faced sunlight or time. Still, the men at the table were convinced. David Carter, the American billionaire, wore his favorite victory suit, navy, tailored, loud. His cufflinks were tiny platinum bulls, a not-so-subtle nod to the stock market. His voice filled the room as he reviewed the highlights of the merger, his tone rehearsed like a man giving a TED talk to a crowd that had already paid admission. He smiled across the table at Naomi. "Shall we make history?" Naomi's expression didn't change. She nodded once, her movements controlled. She reached for the pen. A dozen eyes watched her hand, each person imagining their name on headlines, imagining numbers ticking upward on a stock ticker. And Raven. She stood 6 feet away, tray in hand, throat dry, pulse thudding in her ears. Her whole life, she had learned to stay quiet. Stay composed. Stay useful. But history was about to be rewritten, not by warlords or billionaires. By a lie. Unless someone stopped it. And in that moment, Raven knew exactly what she had to do. The pen was half an inch above the paper. That was all it would take. One quick stroke. One signature. One decision that would lock in $250 million and change the course of 2 global companies. But Raven saw something no one else saw. It started with the ink. It was too perfect. Uniform. As if it had been printed, not written. Ancient Japanese ink, sumi, had texture. It bled into parchment like water into soil. This one didn't. It floated on top, crisp and untouched, like it had something to hide. Then there was the seal. The crimson emblem stamped at the bottom of the page was supposed to be a family crest, the caiman, belonging to a long-deceased Okinawan noble. Raven had studied enough feudal Japanese documents to know what the real ones looked like. She had seen the design before. But here, the symmetry was wrong. One petal too many. One line too clean. It was a beautiful imitation, but it was off. The final clue. The date. The document claimed to be from 1772. But the calligraphy style, though elegant, used a form of kana that didn't come into standard use until nearly 1830. Whoever created this forgery knew just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be invisible. Raven didn't plan what she did next. There was no inner speech, No dramatic countdown. It just happened. She stepped forward, set the tray down on the table, and in flawless, deliberate Japanese, she said, "This is a fake." The effect was immediate. A sharp intake of breath. A scrape of a chair leg. David Carter turned, confusion bleeding into irritation. Naomi froze, pen still hovering, her eyes locked on the paper. Silence. Then voices. Low, angry, disbelieving. What did she say? Who the hell is that? She's the waitress. Raven stood still, calm, focused. She repeated herself in English, voice steady but loud enough to cut through the noise. This document is not authentic. The room shifted again. No one moved. No one blinked. Because deep down, they knew, or at least suspected, she was right. Naomi slowly lowered her pen. And just like that, the deal was no longer moving forward. It was standing still, waiting for the truth. Silence, at first, is just quiet. But this kind of silence felt different. It was the kind that holds its breath. Not out of peace, but out of tension. Raven's words had landed like a dropped glass on marble. Everyone heard it. No one moved. David Carter was the first to break the freeze. His laugh was sharp and dry, more insult than amusement. "Are we seriously entertaining this?" he asked the room, looking around like someone had played a practical joke on him. "She's the waitress. This is a billion-dollar boardroom, not a Netflix drama." Raven didn't respond. She didn't flinch. Another executive, a gray-haired man with a Cartier watch and a voice like gravel, added, "This is what happens when you lower the standards of who gets into the room." A younger man near the back smirked, whispering to his colleague, "They're getting bolder these days. Next thing you know, the janitor will be giving stock advice." Raven heard it all. Every word. But so did Naomi. She hadn't said anything yet, still holding the pen she had nearly used to sign her name. Her hand now rested on the table, steady. Her eyes never left the document, or Raven. David stepped closer to Naomi, lowering his voice but not his arrogance. "Naomi," he said, his tone shifting into a forced calm, "you know what's at stake. Let's not derail a $250 million opportunity over a distraction." That word, distraction. Like Raven's voice was a fly in the room. Something to be swatted, not listened to. But Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was low, but unwavering. "She wasn't wrong about the seal," she said. "Or the ink." The entire room turned toward her. Every eye. Every assumption. David blinked. "Excuse me. I've seen real Edo-era documents," Naomi continued. "That one feels curated, not aged." And she spoke fluent Japanese. Not tourist Japanese. Historical. Academic. The room shifted again. It wasn't loud, but it was no longer calm. Voices started clashing. Doubt rippled across the table like a crack in glass. But the worst reaction. The ones who still dismissed her. "That girl should be fired," someone muttered. "Who let her in here? She's just trying to make a scene." But Raven didn't need their permission. She had the floor now, and the truth had cracked open the ceiling. And Naomi? She wasn't putting the pen back in her hand. She was handing the moment back to Raven. Naomi Takahashi didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her authority didn't come from volume. It came from precision, the way a scalpel slices cleaner than a hammer. And when she rose to her feet, the room didn't just quiet, it braced. She looked at Raven. Not past her. Not through her. Directly at her. And then she looked at the men seated around the table. All of them powerful. All of them silent now. "You all heard her," Naomi said calmly, her tone level. "She made a claim. And none of you asked the only question that matters." She paused. "What if she's right?" David Carter exhaled loudly, leaning back in his chair like a man indulging nonsense. "Naomi, With all due respect, we're not going to let a waitress derail a 9-figure deal based on a gut feeling. Naomi turned to him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak from instinct. She spoke from knowledge. And she spoke in my native language. Not many people in this country, in this room, can do that. Carter tried to cut in, but Naomi didn't stop. You know what I see, she continued. I see a young woman who saw something no one else did. I see a room full of men who got uncomfortable the moment someone without a title challenged their narrative. One of the other executives, trying to shift the mood, chuckled nervously. With all due respect, we're here for business, not a social lesson. Naomi's eyes narrowed just slightly. This is business. This is exactly business. You want to talk risk? Let's talk about the risk of signing a deal built on a forged document. The risk of ignoring red flags because the messenger didn't look like you expected. She turned and gestured toward the document, still sitting untouched in the center of the table. If that paper is real, it'll hold up under scrutiny. But if it's not, then someone here tried to deceive a room full of CEOs, and we were seconds away from falling for it, until she stopped us. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't laced with dismissal. It was heavier. Naomi walked toward Raven, stopped directly beside her. You spoke truth, she said softly. Now you're going to help us prove it. And just like that, the most powerful voice in the room was no longer at the head of the table. The document sat in the center of the table like a ticking clock. It looked aged, carefully yellowed, the edges slightly frayed, the ink sharp, elegant. At first glance, it was a collector's dream. But Raven knew better. And now, so did Naomi. She nodded toward the assistant still hovering awkwardly near the coffee station. Bring a light, Naomi said. And a magnifier. He blinked, unsure if she meant it. She did. A small LED inspection lamp was retrieved from a nearby tech case. They often used it to verify signature marks on contracts. But today, it would be used for something far more serious. Raven stepped forward, careful, composed. Her heart thudded against her chest, but her face remained steady. Naomi gestured for her to speak. Start with the paper, Raven said, voice steady. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress anyone. She spoke like a professor in a lecture hall, not a waitress in a boardroom. This paper is too consistent. In real historical documents from the Edo period, paper was made from mulberry bark, and the fibers are uneven. Handmade sheets from that era almost always show slight warping or thinning in the corners. This one is flawless. Manufactured. She held the light close. The surface didn't ripple. No fiber variation. No inconsistency. She continued, pointing to the ink. Traditional sumi ink oxidizes over time. You get bleeding, fading, and most importantly, absorption into the paper. But here, she paused, holding the light at an angle. It's sitting on top, like a fresh print. A low murmur rippled through the room. Naomi stepped in, backing her up. She's right. And this seal. She picked up the magnifier, holding it over the bottom corner. This caiman is off. The Takahashi family crest only has 5 petals. This one has 6. Raven nodded. And the character stroke used here? She pointed carefully. That calligraphy style wasn't formalized until decades later. It didn't exist in 1772. David Carter, red-faced, tried to wave it off. Well, maybe the historian got creative. That doesn't mean. It means it's fake, Naomi said, her voice flat. Raven said nothing more. She didn't need to. The room wasn't debating anymore. They were realizing. This wasn't about whether a young black woman had the right to speak. It was about the fact that she had been right all along. And now, the truth was staring them in the face, in black ink and false history. The moment the truth settled in, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No gasps. No screaming. Just silence, the kind that follows when powerful people realize they nearly walked off a cliff. Naomi stepped back from the table, crossing her arms, eyes locked on the forged document as if it might still change. But it wouldn't. It couldn't. What had once looked like the crown jewel of the deal now lay there exposed. Not his treasure, but his bait. David Carter's face drained of color. The swagger was gone. The tight-lipped smirk replaced by a forced calm, the kind you use when you're calculating damage. "I'm sure there's an explanation," he muttered. "There is," Naomi said. "Someone tried to deceive this room." And then she looked at Raven. Not with pity. Not with gratitude alone. But with respect. "You saved my company today," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "And probably my career." Raven blinked, almost in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to be seen. She was supposed to clock out, go home, and hope for a decent tip. But instead, here she was, standing in front of a table of billionaires. A CEO just thanked her in front of all of them, and not one of them could argue, because they all knew she was right. Naomi turned back to the room. "This deal is over," she said firmly. "Until we audit every piece of supporting documentation, every claim, every historical reference, Cusan Robotics will not proceed." David Carter didn't argue. He couldn't. The weight of the exposure had flattened the room. His eyes dropped to the paper again, as if it might somehow redeem him. But it didn't. Security was called, not to escort Raven out, but to monitor the meeting until legal teams arrived. Lawyers would follow. So would press. And damage control. But that was their storm to deal with. Naomi had avoided signing away her company based on lies. Because one woman, overlooked, underestimated, unseen, had spoken up. And now, Raven wasn't just the woman who had served coffee at the summit. She was the woman who had stopped a $250 million mistake. All with her eyes, her voice, and her truth. Raven Walker didn't set out to be anyone's hero. She didn't wake up that morning thinking she would change the course of a $250 million deal. She wasn't looking for attention. She wasn't hoping for recognition. She just couldn't stay silent in the face of something wrong. And that, right there, is the lesson. In a world obsessed with titles, outfits, and polished resumes, we forget that truth doesn't always show up wearing a nameplate. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing an apron and holding a tray. Sometimes it stands in the corner of the room, unnoticed, until it speaks. Raven didn't have a platform. She didn't have a seat at the table. But she had the one thing that mattered most: clarity. The courage to speak when it would have been easier to stay invisible. That moment wasn't about ego. It wasn't about proving she was smarter than the executives or more educated than the experts. It was about integrity. About listening to that inner voice that whispers, "Say something," even when the world tells you to shut up. And that's what makes her powerful. Because most people second-guess themselves into silence. They look around the room and think, "Who am I to speak?" They worry they'll sound stupid, be dismissed, be laughed at. But Raven proved something else. That you don't need permission to speak the truth. That the right thing doesn't need credentials. And that sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one that matters most. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been told you're too young, too quiet, too different, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong at the table, this story is yours too. It's a reminder that truth doesn't need volume. It needs courage. It needs presence. Raven didn't just expose a forgery. She exposed something deeper, the bias that lets lies flourish when no one dares to look closer. And by refusing to shrink, she didn't just save a CEO. She reminded everyone that sometimes, the most powerful person in the room isn't the one speaking the loudest. It's the one who knows what's real and refuses to let it go unseen. Maybe you've been in that room before. Not the penthouse conference suite with the skyline views, but the kind of room where you're expected to be small. where your presence is tolerated, not valued, where the unspoken rule is, don't speak unless spoken to. But then, something feels off. A comment that crosses the line. A number that doesn't add up. A moment that makes your gut twist even if everyone else pretends it's normal. We've all had them, those split seconds where you feel it. That something isn't right. And the easy thing is to say nothing. To keep your head down. To tell yourself it's not your place. But Raven's story proves something powerful. You don't need to have the loudest voice in the room. You just need the courage to use it. Because silence has a cost. And sometimes, speaking up isn't just about stopping a mistake, it's about starting something better. Something honest. Something lasting. This isn't just a black story. Or a woman's story. It's a human story. A reminder that value doesn't come from where you sit, what you wear, or how much money you make. It comes from your willingness to act, especially when no one's asking you to. So here's my ask for you. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a time you stayed quiet, or a time you wish someone had spoken up for you, don't just move on. Leave a comment. Tell me where you were when you heard this. Tell me if it made you remember something. And if you believe that stories like Raven's matter, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Because these aren't just stories. They're lessons. And sometimes, all it takes to shift the power in a room is one sentence. This is a fake. Let that be a reminder. Trust your instincts. Question the obvious. And never, ever stay silent when something doesn't sit right. Your voice might be the one thing no one's expecting. But it could be the one thing they all need to hear.